Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us again today. Today, my guest is Sally. Sally, welcome. Tell us a bit about who you are, what your role is, and about your company.
Thank you, James. Thank you for having me here.
Not at all.
My name's Sally Haslewood. I own a company called Mumbler Limited, founded in 2011. So we just turned 13 years old. Headquarters are in Harrogate. And it's a business that's online parenting websites and the social media community around that.
Now, this has been a bit of a hit in Harrogate, hasn't it? How many people subscribe?
We have around 20,000 people a month visiting our website. We've got a Facebook community with a similar number. And it's crazy to think, really, when it first started, it was never meant to be a business at all. It was just me and a handful of friends on a little Facebook group. So it's, from small beginnings, I suppose. And it's not just in Harrogate now. We've franchised it across the UK. So I've got 19 different Mumbler territories now. And across those, we get around, I think it's about 3.2 million visitors annually.
Gosh.
And about 250,000 followers on the various social media channels. So, yeah, we're small and local, but we're also national.
It's nice, isn't it, that local feel, but that national reach. So tell me a little bit about what you do, what you aim to do.
Okay, well, when we first started, very much as we are now, the whole reason behind Mumbler was to make family life easier. To start with, it was just about me. I moved back to Harrogate when I was, I think it was 3 days before I gave birth to my second daughter.
Was it?
So I was from Harrogate originally, born and bred, but then I left to go to university, as a lot of people do. Met my husband, who was in the military. So we spent the following 12 years travelling around, partially internationally with the British military, but then when he left the military, we moved back down south because we were worried about employment. He's a northerner as well, not from Harrogate. He's a Lancastrian.
Never mind.
And I found myself in the situation where we were ready to start a family. We had our first daughter. And the truth is, it was really hard. And we had no friends and family really locally. We had work colleagues, but because we'd moved around a lot, we weren't settled. So when I had my daughter, I found it was incredibly difficult. I didn't have a support network. So we made the decision as a couple, right, we need to move back north. We need to get back to people that we know, friends and family. So we did. We put everything in place. And then the timing was pretty awful, having to sell a house and whatnot. So yeah, I moved up to Harrogate on the Monday, gave birth to my daughter on the Thursday.
You didn't?
I did.
That's madness.
Yeah, we had a house that we couldn't move into because it needed fully doing up. And I thought, you know what, I'm back in a town that I know, but
Yes.
The last time I'd been in Harrogate, I'd been a 19, 20-year-old, so my needs were very different with a toddler and a baby. So I needed to go about and find out what was on locally for families.
How did you go about that at first?
Well, I was amazed because this was 2011, so the internet wasn't new. We were digital at that point. Social media was established. We had Facebook. I think Instagram was available, but probably nowhere near as popular as it is now. Obviously, no TikTok or Snapchat. Those are more modern. So I just went about making a small Facebook chat group. So I thought, if I'm looking for things to do as a busy family, there'll be other people out there that need it as well. And it was just a case of asking other people for information, trying to get the information that I needed, but at the same time thinking, if I'm spending the time on this, I may as well share my knowledge. There generally was no business intention at that point. It was just about creating a little community for myself because, you know, I was lonely and I needed to find out local information. So that's where it all started.
So just talk a little bit about that in terms of the information you were trying to impart and you were trying to gain from others. Was that specific to you and your needs coming back? Was it specific to parents who perhaps didn't have family around? What was it that you were trying to impart?
I don't think it was particularly well thought out. It was entirely selfish at that stage. It was what I needed. I wasn't necessarily thinking about other people's needs, but I just knew from being a military spouse, I knew that there would be other people in my situation, but it was definitely more about me at that stage. It was letting me find out what was out there, finding play groups that I could go to make new friends. I knew that in order to successfully settle as a family, we would need to have a circle of friends, ideally people with kids the same age or similar age, and just make my life easier, find out what was on locally, which restaurants you could go to with a toddler and a baby and not get tarred and feathered when they drop something on the floor. Just everything that a local family, and this is where the sort of very start of the business came in, because whilst initially it was very much about my own needs as a busy mum, it soon when I was doing up a house, so I needed to find tradespeople. If you needed to purchase something, it's where do you go to get the best of, whatever it was. At this time of year, it would be where do you get your Christmas tree?
Yes.
In the summer, it's where do you go to paddle with the kids? All the different things that you would just ask. If you were from a place and if you had that network organically, you would ask your friends and family. And I needed to find that digitally. And it felt very natural to do that in a Facebook group. At that stage, as I say, Facebook wasn't new. We knew what we were doing with Facebook. And so, and the name actually, because I called it Mumbler from the beginning, and people always ask me, where did that name come from?
Tell us. I'm interested.
It was actually my mum that came up with it.
Was it?
When I'd moved back and I'd said, look, I'm going to do this. I'm going to set up a Facebook group, but I need some name. And I'm not from a marketing background. I had no knowledge of marketing or anything digital. So I was chatting with my mum, and back in the day, she was in advertising, and she was like, leave it with me. And she came back and she was like, I've got the word for you. It's Mumbler. It's mum's talking. It's Mumbler. And I was like, perfect.
That's a really good name. But at the beginning, you had a little problem with that name, didn't you? Just tell us about that.
Yeah, not at the very early stages. So when it was just a Facebook group in Harrogate called Harrogate Mumbler, it was fine. But as the business progressed, I got to the stage where I thought potentially we're going to either be taking on staff or we're going to be expanding the brand, that I need to put protections in place. Whilst I had no personal experience of being employed, I wasn't naive to it. And also my parents had been self-employed and my husband worked in the corporate world. So I had an awareness of things like protecting your brand. So I thought, right, if we are going to expand this, it's about time I probably trademarked it. So I went down the path of trademarking and registered with the trademark office in the UK. But you have to, when you do it, there's a period of time when people can object. And I got an objection letter from I don't even know if I'm allowed to say the name because I can't remember even what we agreed because it was over 10 years ago now. But it was a big international, very well-known American brand owned by another one that's name happened to rhyme with Mumbler. And they were not happy with me using the word Mumbler. So that was a bit of a David and Goliath moment and quite frightening at the start of the business journey, to be honest.
And your little person over here and their big organisation over there.
Yeah.
We want to know, did you win?
Yes, it's called Mumbler.
Of course you are.
But it was frightening. And when I look back now, it's easy to just think it's something that we dealt with. But at the time, in 2 accounts, it was... Well, probably more than that. First of all, financially, I was starting out a business with no money. So I didn't have money for lawyers and I certainly didn't have money to be going to court because ultimately, even though I knew in my heart that I was right and we weren't copying another brand, it was just purely that the names rhymed. The thought of it being dragged out for a long period of time and potentially going to an IP court, which I knew would potentially be incredibly expensive. So that was frightening. So what I did in the end was I paid for financial advice. I paid for advice from an IP lawyer, but they didn't respond on my behalf. We had meetings and they advised me what to do. And because I thought there is actually power in it coming from the little person rather than coming back from a solicitor. And in the end, they backed off and it was fine and we did go through with it.
So that's a personal victory.
Absolutely. Yes, but I was so passionate about my name. I knew that we were doing the right thing. I've always been very firm with, trying to do the right thing and we weren't copying anyone. It was absolutely tenuous. So, we stuck to our guns and I'm so glad that I did.
I'm glad that you did as well. And let's go back again a little bit. So you didn't intend this to be a business. You've made that clear. You say for purely selfish reasons, you wanted to know where to take the children out and about. It's very familial. Your mum came up with the name. Mm-hmm. When did this start to become a business, even an idea, if you like? When did that come about?
So it's probably useful to give you a bit of the background from me. So Mumbler is ultimately a digital marketing tool. We provide information for parents and it's free to use at the point of use for parents. But the way that it earns revenue is that any businesses or companies or service providers that want to interact or advertise to parents pay us to advertise. So that's how we earn revenue. And it was always important to me that it was free at the point of use because, parenting is hard enough without having to pay for the information that you need. My background prior to this, as I've said, I had no digital marketing experience. I was a chartered surveyor. So I was working for the valuation office at the time. And when we moved to North Yorkshire from the south of England, I actually was on maternity leave. Obviously, I had my daughter 4 days later. So the plan was always, they fortunately let me transfer my position from where I was in Reading to the Harrogate office. Unfortunately, the Harrogate office closed while I was on maternity leave.
Oh, no.
So then I got to the situation where it was fine because there was offices in York and Leeds, and they offered me a position there. And I was fortunate enough to be in the position to have 12 months maternity leave. So I'd started Mumbler as this hobby for myself, but it got to the stage probably about 6 or 9 months down the line where initially it'd just been a handful of people, and then it'd grown and grown and grown. And I think I'd got to the stage where there was about 1,000 local parents using it on the daily. It was the busiest little group. And then people started asking for advice about where to go to get your carpet cleaned or where to go to get your double glazing from. And people were genuinely and organically getting recommendations. And it got to the stage where a couple of businesses made the approach to me and said, we've had some business off the back of you. We'd like to do more. What can we do? And so the genius that I am, I thought, oh, hang on, I've got people offering to pay me.
Yeah.
And I've got an audience. So it
got something here.
Yeah, it didn't take too much to put 2 and 2 together and think, you know what, there's something here. And at that point, I was coming towards the end of my maternity leave. And the honest answer is, when I did the sums about how much it would cost me to put 2 children in nursery, I was working, I think, 4 days a week prior to going on maternity leave, so I would have been going back 4 days a week. The costs of having 2 children in full-time nursery, plus the additional hour each side for me to commute to Leeds or York, I would have put them in the moment nursery opened. They would have been in care all day. I would have had that awful feeling of, am I going to get back in time before the nursery closes, which I'd experienced with my first daughter, and it's just awful. And the difference between me working and not working was £400 a month.
Was it really?
And I thought, £400 a month, I had to earn it. We, particularly in that stage, we were, as people who have young families will know, every penny counts. But I thought there's other ways to earn £400 a month that don't involve the additional pressures. And that's where I thought, that was my first sort of business plan, that I thought, if I can earn £400 a month from Mumbler, that's it. That's going to allow me to do a job which I'm passionate about, something that I really cared about, was making a difference to other people, and would allow me the privilege of being able to stay off work and raise my children myself. So,
and did you at that stage, it's a really interesting period of your life and probably a lot of pressure on you to make well, there was a pressure. You've got a deadline on you, haven't you, by which you have to go back to work. Did you plan meticulously for the business to be, or is it at that stage still, no, this is great, because I think this is what people don't understand sometimes, that businesses can be organic, can't they?
I still don't plan meticulously. And I think it's one of the things that I've learned in business, and that I've now got faith in myself. It takes all different types. And certainly within my organisation, there are people that do, and I need them. But I now recognise my own skills, and being a meticulous planner is not one of them. I have, hand on heart, never put together a business case for my own business. I've been through many sort of incubator type programs over the years, and it always comes up, but that just doesn't work for me. Turns out I'm more creative than I thought, but I do recognise the importance of having people within your team with the different skill sets, but it's also recognising where your strong points are, and that's not one of them for me.
Did you recognise that at the beginning? Or was it not a case of needing to recognise it at the beginning? I
think at the very beginning, I was fortunate enough because my husband was working, and, ultimately he could take the burden, the lion's share of earning. So initially, whilst it did need to make some money, it didn't have to support us both. So I was very fortunate in that respect. When I started the business, first of all, as I say, this initial target was £400 a month, which I look back now and think, it was lovely because it was very attainable. We didn't have to get outside investment. There was the cost. One of the problems that I had, one of the first hurdles was I was just on Facebook, and whilst Facebook is brilliant and all social media platforms are brilliant, there's no permanence to them. And I'd found that the same questions or the same requirements from my followers were coming up, and I had no place to house that permanently. So it was quite a natural thing to then take it onto its own domain, which then also gave me the opportunity to start selling advertising spaces and generate revenue. But there was a cost, obviously. I'd never built a website myself. I'm not a tech person, so I had to employ a web designer, who I'm still with now, actually.
That's great.
And I have had to pay for the first website, obviously learn as I went about, what I actually want. I think sometimes it's quite difficult, and particularly if you're not a planner, you do have to really think when you're building a website, particularly one that's going to house a lot of information about not only how it's going to look, but how it's going to work and how it's going to be useful for your audience. So that was a learning curve, but, I'm pleased to say I think in the first month I hit my £400 target, and within about 3 months I'd paid off the cost of the website. So
that's incredible. And at that early stage, how far ahead are you looking? You know, I think you gave it
on the day,
almost day by day, to hit that 400, to pay the website off.
Yeah, and you know, when I look back now, I had a brand new baby and a toddler, so I was working nap times and evenings. I'm the champion of flexible working, but it's because that's how I've always had to work. And the amount that I achieved, when I look back, I actually don't think I know how I did it, because anybody who's got a couple of young children or even a young child will know it's a nightmare. But it gave me the privilege of being around with them, because of the nature of my work. I was often going to places to review them. You know, having a day trip out at a local attraction was part of my job. You know, I just had to take photos and maybe write a review afterwards. But I think I'm so lucky. Still to this day, I feel like I'm one of the lucky ones, because now I earn a living from my hobby. And don't get me wrong, there's not every day feels like that, but in the majority of the cases, I've found the golden goose, I think.
It's brilliant if you can combine what you like with earning a living. It's absolutely fantastic, isn't it? And you're clearly passionate about it. So you get through the first sort of few months, you pay off the website. Mm-hmm. When does it become a little bit more, gosh, this is more of a business than I thought? It's more than just £400 a month.
Well, I think initially it was month on month. I remember I've still got a cash book that I kept, because I didn't do any digital invoicing at that stage, where I actually wrote down, who my customers were and tried to retain them. And I'm pleased to say, even now, 13 years later, some of those early customers, the ones that sort of were the ones who encouraged me to become a business, they're still with me. And I think, I didn't realise it at the time, but it came quite naturally. If you look after your customers, do right by them, they'll stick with you. And as I say, we've still got quite a few of the early adopters there. And then with Harrogate Mumbler, so we took it onto its own. So initially started in August 2011 on the website, and it was the following November 2012 that I took it onto its own website. And then it sort of, I'd say it potted along, but it was growing month on month. The revenue figures were good. I was doing something that I loved. And then it was through two people, one of which was somebody who worked with my sister. So she was in marketing. And it was a very similar situation to me. Had 2 children, had worked the corporate life prior to that. But with the second child, just thought, you know what, something's got to change. And it's this situation where you just feel like you're not doing right by anybody. And, I think probably I could say with all of my franchisees and employees, it's not that they didn't like their job. In fact, in a lot of cases, they loved their job. But suddenly when you become a parent, and it's not gender specific, I mean, traditionally it's more female than male, but you just get this sensation that you're not doing right by anybody. And particularly when the children are young. And when I look back when I was working as a surveyor, as long as we were all well and healthy, life was okay, but all it took was somebody to go down with a bug or some other crisis, and then this sort of house of cards, which was just about holding up, just came tumbling down. And it just got to the stage where, gosh, I remember just that feeling of dread when you used to go into valuation tribunals and the nursery had phoned that your child's sick, and you just think, I'm being a terrible mother, I'm being a terrible employee. And I just thought, you know what? We're not doing this anymore. And then, so with my first sort of franchisee, it was the same situation. She was like, I want to do something that I'm passionate about, that's a job that you can feel good about, but has that flexibility so that, if on occasion your kid needs you, you can be there, but still something to get your teeth stuck into. So through my sister, she introduced me to this lady called Rachel, and she was like, can we try what you've done in Hull? So I thought, we'll give it a go. At that stage, I didn't know if it was me that was special or if it was what the company I created. Well, it turns out it's the company that I created. It wasn't me. And I'm delighted that Rachel's still with me. She's still running Hull and the East Riding Mumbler. She was my first ever franchisee. And then on the back of that, my sister, who had been the introducer to me and Rachel, had thought, she lives in York. And she was like, do you know what, there might be something here as well. And she wasn't, I think she'd had her first child, or she was pregnant with her first child. So she set up a Facebook group as well. But again, it was tickling around the edges. It wasn't necessarily going to be a business, but she liked the community that I'd created and she wanted to replicate that for herself. And sure enough, same story, a couple of years later, well, in fact, probably a year later from the Facebook group, she set up the website and then she left the corporate world. And again, York Mumbler is still with us and is one of our biggest and most lucrative franchises still. So this is very organic, isn't it? Yeah,
this is
very organic.
Friend, sister.
Yeah. Yeah.
they want to be involved because they have the same issues in life. One thing I do want to just touch on is it's called Mumbler, obviously, which references mums, but this is very much about parents and carers generally, isn't it? Can you just tell me a little bit about that?
Well, it's something that we did have a lot of thought of in the early days. I think coming from my own position as a mum felt very natural, but we very soon realised we don't want to exclude anybody. And whilst I love the brand name and Mumbler falls off the tongue, we changed all of the other language to make it more gender neutral and age neutral. There's parents, there's carers, there's grandparents, we have childminders. Just basically anybody who's involved in family life is welcome for Mumbler. So we've been very careful over the years. When we first started, one of the areas of the website was called Jobs for Mums, because we realised, again, there was, I think in most situations, there's been a need, and then I've sort of hopefully plugged that gap, and we saw that there was an opportunity for companies that were trying to recruit flexibly, or maybe short-term contracts or part-time contracts, and some full-time contracts, but the ones that specialise in more flexible working. So we had this Jobs for Mums page, but then we're like, what are we doing? We don't want to continue on that narrative. It's jobs for parents, and ultimately it's jobs for anybody who wants them, but they're more flexible. That's what we're looking at, potentially with employees who are a little bit more open-minded, which fortunately now 12, 13 years down the way, a lot more are, but prior to COVID, few were.
No, that's absolutely true. And yes, COVID certainly changed things.
Changed everything.
So this is very much for carers and parents as a whole, because after all, this is about information, about where to take your children, making family life easier, yes, as you say. So moving on into the mid sort of towards 2015 and so on, you've mentioned that you have a franchise model.
Yeah.
Can you just tell us a little bit about how you came to that decision to operate a franchise model?
Well, so with the first two, as I said, there was a personal relationship and a friend of a friend. So it was very easy and organic, and I covered the cost myself, because I think because I was naive in business, and I make no apologies, I'm glad I was, I didn't want to sell something that didn't have value, that wasn't going to work. I needed to be very comfortable myself that the business was had the potential to be successful, that it wasn't just reliant on me, or wasn't just reliant on them, that we were going to give them something good with value. So, as I say, covered the cost myself for the first two. But after that, and it would have been 2015, 16, I thought, I was comfortable then that we had something that was good. So at that point, I thought the opportunity to franchise sounded good to me. I think, again, I was... I'd say naive, but that makes it sound bad. I was new in business, and I didn't feel comfortable with the idea of just employing staff, taking outside investment. None of that appealed at all. So the franchise model seemed to fit more with what I was comfortable with. So initially, I was quite lucky. My husband is a bid writer, so it's been very useful to me, because there was some opportunities for funding. And back in those days, I think it was some European fund, and plus there was some funding from the LEP. So I was managed to get, it wasn't grant funding, but it was 50%, which obviously took the sting out when you're investing in something like a franchise consultant. So I got a franchise consultant on board to help get the information out of my head and down on paper, which was a big undertaking, actually. And I remember reflecting back after a couple of years and thinking, not only was it a big undertaking from a time point of view, it was also financially a huge undertaking. It cost a lot of money to get from the point where it was just me running Harrogate Mumbler to where I was comfortable and ready to take on strangers as franchisees. And a huge learning journey along the way, but we got there.
Did you know what franchising was before you entered into it, other than the name, of course?
Yeah, other than passively. Obviously, I was aware of what franchising was, generally speaking, but I had no experience. I didn't know anybody who'd ddone franchising themselves, nobody that I could really chat to. I was lucky with the franchise consultant that I found, possibly he found me, I can't even remember. It all seems like hazy in the past now. He was a really knowledgeable guy. And whilst he didn't have particular experience in my field, it certainly gave me the confidence to, as I say, get the information out of my head. And particularly for somebody who isn't a planner, that was quite an undertaking. But get the situation where we've got the documentation in place, we've got the legal framework, the franchise agreement, even in the run-up to it, having the prospectus ready for people who wanted to inquire with us, knowing where to advertise your franchise opportunity, all of those things. And there's so many out there, from your McDonald's, which you'll be talking probably £250,000 plus, up, down to the ones where you're spending a couple of £100 and everything in between. So trying to find out where we fit in between all of that. And then had a couple of really good years franchising, took on some amazing people, the vast majority of which are still with me today. Some of them aren't. And over the years, we've had some wastage. It sounds awful, doesn't it? Wastage over the years. But one thing I'm incredibly proud of is we've never had anyone leave us badly. For various reasons. I feel like I could still pick up the phone to any one of them and vice versa. So I feel very proud of that.
That's always a nice thing. I mean, people... Their priorities change in life and people move on. I understand that. So you got up to 19.
At one point we had, I think, 23.
23 franchises. Yeah. And just give an impression of what the reach is around.
We're very Yorkshire heavy. Mm-hmm. I think as a brand it's been so much easier where we've had that brand awareness and we've just sort of naturally moved out. So 14 of the 19 now are still in Yorkshire. And then across the rest of the UK we've got one in Norwich. We've got one down on the south coast, Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole, Mumbler, and we've got two around Manchester, Stockport and East Cheshire, but the rest of them are all in Yorkshire. And so you've had this franchise model and not everybody goes down the franchise route, but as you say, the model is that they pay you something, you have a quality manual which enables them to know how to run the brand and the business, and you take effectively a percentage of earnings, if you will, from... I actually never did that. So this is something that people don't necessarily know about the Mumbler franchise. Again, when I look back, I don't know if it's business naivety or probably not, because I still stand by it. In the early days, I didn't want to charge a flat rate percentage. And the reason being is from a personal point of view, I thought I can understand that in the first year or two when they're reliant very heavy on me and I'm doing the training and I'm really giving them good value. But then I could see, and as I progressed a little bit, I did chat to some of the franchise owners and I learned about the problems with people maybe not declaring all their earnings or building up resentment or, as they go further along in the business that they're still paying you a chunk and maybe they have the perception they're not getting value. And that didn't sit well with me. So because we're in the advertising sales business, I thought there's got to be another way to do this. So what I came up with is, yes, I still charge a fee when I'm selling the franchise, and they do pay a monthly fee to cover their ongoing costs like server fees and email fees and the tech fees. But I never charged a franchise fee per se. Instead, because we sell advertising, I kept the premium advertising spaces on all of the websites, and that's mine. So I sell it. And I earn the revenue from it. And the idea in the early days was that would give me the opportunity to go to bigger companies who potentially wouldn't necessarily just want one advertising space on one website, but they might want to take campaigns across them all, particularly because we've got the little pockets of local knowledge. So it might be the case that if a big brand came along and placed a campaign across us all, they might give a very different message in Harrogate than they might do in Hull or that sort of thing. Or even within a town, we know our audience. So that's how we earn income from Mumbler HQ primarily. There is also an incentive for the franchisees to sell their advertising space on behalf of me, because I didn't want them to be in the situation where a local advertiser comes along and says, I want to be on your homepage. And they say, no, you don't want to be on there. So there is also a commission scheme for them if they sell it on my behalf, and also a penalty scheme if they're empty and they're not making any effort on my behalf, then there is a small fee to pay. So I also know.
That's a really clever model, isn't it? Because, as you say, they can't be resentful because you're not, even, I can imagine it, as you say, where you've given the training at the beginning, but they feel as though they've then gone on and grown it. They don't relate their growth back to their first couple of years. Yeah. So that advertising model, and that's a fairly new way of doing things in this sort of modern online world, isn't it? You wouldn't have seen that in the past. No, and
I think it's probably specific to what we do as a company. And also, because I remembered when I first started Harrogate Mumbler, there was instances where, because in a lot of instances I was dealing with micro businesses, they didn't have advertising budgets, but they might say to me, if we can be on your website, come and try our ballet classes. I assume nobody in the Inland Revenue is listening to this podcast. But we did do that, in the early days, and it was a good starter in the business. And even now, if a company, and even if they do have advertising spend, I always think, from a business point of view, it's good business to give a little bit of goodwill, show what we can do, demonstrate our worth, and then go after them for the spend. And, we're in a good position to do that. And obviously, there's value to be added that isn't just pound, shilling and pence. And so that was a consideration in the early days. If also for the franchisees, even if they, to start with, when they had to earn revenue, there's value to be had from other ways rather than just invoicing and, hopefully as a successful business, they will make money, but they've got to do what they need to do in the first few months and weeks to get the ball rolling and to forge those relationships. So
just in terms of your advertisers, you will have local to your areas and you'll have the larger ones. Do you set specific criteria which they must meet? Now, clearly you can't be too specific, but do you have rules, self-imposed rules, which you look for in advertisers?
Absolutely. One of the things with Mumbler that has always been so important to me and continues to be is doing the right thing. It's fundamental to who I am as a person and as a business person. And there have been times where companies have approached us and they've just not felt right. And it's not necessarily something tangible that I could tell you, but they just haven't felt right for our audience. And I firmly believe a reputation is hard earned. And we've been around a long time and our followers trust us and they believe what we say. And I hold that responsibility very seriously. And sometimes it's awkward because I've had companies and I've trusted my instincts and thought, something just feels off and I've said, I'm sorry, we can't work with you. And inevitably, 9 times out of 10, something's come out of the woodwork later on. You think, you know, I'm glad I trusted my instincts. They weren't the right people for us. And there's always that, what if, particularly when it's financial and, we're a small business. So it's not as if we can afford to turn away business all the time. But I do fundamentally believe, your instincts are there for a reason. If something feels off, it probably is. And then also there's been learnings. I mean, our customers are very much parents. We're not aiming at children. It's parents, but I still feel like we've turned away certain industry sectors. We had one recently and it was a local authority campaign to try and encourage people to give up smoking. But the side effect was promoting vaping. Well, I've got teenage girls now, so we're not going to promote vaping, even though I understand for certain people it's a very good path to go down. But I've got a moral obligation not to have nicotine products on my websites, and that's self-imposed, but that's how I feel. And we've done the same with gambling in the past, and certain things relating to parenting. We've had certain industry sectors, and we've had some customer feedback, and it's things that maybe felt okay to me, but we've had a bit of never a terrible response, but just hasn't felt right. And in which case we take it on board and we learn from it.
Do you get sort of debates on the site about controversial parenting issues? I can think of breast milk versus powder milk. Those sorts. Do you get those issues?
We certainly have had pretty much everything you can imagine over the years. Not on our websites because users don't publish on our websites. This has been purely social media.
Yes.
And that was a conscious decision back in the day because, again, I was learning about my responsibilities as a publisher.
The laws of defamation. Yes.
The vast majority of people are good and decent, but people can get carried away with keyboard warriors, and we've seen it all over the years. So we've always kept the discussion and the interaction on social media.
Yes.
And even then we do moderate it quite seriously. But there's that fine line between healthy discussion and difference of opinion, absolutely fine, but disrespect or online aggression, absolutely not okay. So we always do take action if something happens. And we're very, very lucky that because of the communities we've created online, we have a lot of volunteers who help us moderate the groups. And we do take action if people aren't using our groups for the right purposes. And we've got strict rules about you're fine to have a difference of opinion, but you've always got to be respectful. Yes. And if people don't adhere to that, then they get removed. But yes, over the years, it generally is the subjects such as how to feed your child, how to discipline your child, whether or not you co-sleep with your child. There's some that we, if we see those subjects come up, we'll just keep a closer eye on it.
That's interesting, isn't it? Because they do invoke passion in people that they have the right way. And yes, you could see sometimes that could be an obstacle to respect of other opinions.
Yeah. But generally, the vast, vast majority of people, even if they choose to parent differently, are respectful. So, and I think this was definitely a problem 9-10 years ago, a lot more than it is now. I think the thing with social media is sometimes etiquette does take a little time to catch up with it, but I think people are more aware of what is and isn't okay online. But yeah, over the years, when I think about it, I've had people threatening to sue me for things that other people have said on Facebook, and I've had businesses contact me, and Yeah, all of which is terribly frightening when it first starts, and it's a real worry. And I've had questions internally over the years, am I doing the right thing? But as with all these things, you live and learn, and the second time it happens, it's never as shocking, and you learn the process. And in my case, and it's the way that I work, I'm not one for creating processes unnecessarily, but if something comes up, there's always a learning. And at that point, maybe I need to put process in place so that the next time it happens, we're better prepared, we can react quicker and more professionally. And
do you find that if something comes up for the first time, it's probably not as bad as it may actually seem at first, that you've dealt with things in the past which came up for the first time?
Yeah, and that's, it's one of the things that I think I add real value to my franchisees, and hopefully continue to do so, because most things that have come up we've dealt with previously. I hope to always try and remember what it was like for them the first time, because it can be quite shocking. And now that I employ staff myself as well as franchisees, it's the same situation, but making sure that I'm there and that they can reach out to me if needs be. And not just me, the rest of the team. I've put together this amazing group of people, and the knowledge that they've got and the past experience they've got, they've all come from different professional backgrounds. They all bring different things to the table. So even if I can't necessarily answer the question, others will. Because it's definitely one thing that I found as I grew as a business person is I'm away from the coalface now. So it's not necessarily me seeing the day-to-day grind. I've got to rely on my staff and my franchisees to feed that back. Whereas rewind 6 years ago, I was the one at the coalface dealing with the issues head on.
Now, that's really interesting, because clearly your values matter to Mumbler, but you, as a business person, cannot be at the coalface. How do you make sure that your values and the sort of decisions that you would make, but you're busy elsewhere, how do you make sure that the right things are being done?
I think that's a really good question, and fundamentally it comes down to probably one of my other major business principles is it's the people that you employ. Taking on the right people in the start, not being frightened to take on people that are better than you, and a lot of my team are better than me. And I've got no qualms in saying that.
Better? What do you mean better?
Just different skill sets. They are amazing. There's some things that they do far better than I would. They're all incredibly talented at what they do. Not afraid to ask for help. Not afraid to offer help. And don't get me wrong, I've got it wrong in times over the years. And I've had to let people go. And that's probably one of the worst things for me in business. But I think in terms of that failure, I'm not frightened of failure at all. As with all these things, it gets easier as you go, and there's always something to be learned. In fact, there's often more to be learned when it goes wrong than when things go right. But one of my mantras currently is if you're going to fail, fail fast. Right.
Well, let me ask you, is there an example you're willing to share with us of failing and failing fast and then getting back on the right track?
I'd say in staffing, the two are very entwined. There was a stage a couple of years ago that I took on 3 people for various roles, all fantastic people. I can't say they weren't right, but 2 of them excelled, and one of them, the franchise wasn't going that well. And I think had quiet alarm bells that I chose to ignore for too long. And it took me probably, 18 months to think, right, do you know what? I need to make a decision here. This isn't working financially. And it wasn't just impacting that particular franchise. Obviously, to keep things going, if they're not lucrative themselves, it's impacting the rest of the business. So it's not just about this one person, this one franchise. I've got to look after the whole company. And ultimately that led to having to make a difficult decision and having to let her go. And it was awful. I mean, she took it incredibly well. She was probably more professional than I was. It was quite upsetting, and I'm not embarrassed to admit that. It's I'm as invested in my people as I hope that they are with me. But the next time it happened, fast forward another year later, I took on somebody else, and within a month, I'd made that decision. My alarm bells were going off fairly quickly, and this time I listened to them. And again, it was done. I can't say it was the person. She was fabulous, just wasn't a perfect fit for the role. So she was in and out within a month. And, that's how I'll be moving forward. I learned, I think, a lot that first time.
It's interesting. You talked earlier, in fact, it was in the context of advertising about listening to your gut reaction. It's not necessarily objectively clear why.
Yeah.
But how important is relying on your gut?
100%. Yeah. Without a doubt. I'd say it's the most important thing, because my career, as I mentioned, was not in business. I've never done any formal business training or marketing. So unfortunately, I don't have that noise in my head. I don't know what the proper terms for things are. I don't know how you're supposed to do it. And that's quite freeing, actually. Ultimately, I'm relying on my instincts and, equally happy to hold my hands up when I get things wrong, which I do. But most of the time, if your gut's telling you something, I do fundamentally believe you listen to it. And
in that, you were saying that it's not just that person themselves in the staffing case, but it does impact on not just the business, the organisation, but other people as well, doesn't it? And they see somebody not necessarily getting away with it. Perhaps that's not the right term, but it does impact negatively on others, doesn't it, if you don't cut that problem out quickly?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you say, it can be culturally. Most of my people work remotely. So I've got a team of 7 at my HQ. 4 of them are in the office in and out of the week. The others are remote, but all of my franchisees are obviously remote because they're working from their location. So whilst it isn't that negative chat around the water cooler type thing, you're right. And particularly so in our example, there might be customers who have taken advertising across multiple areas, and most of my franchisees will work incredibly hard, and my employees will work incredibly hard to deliver on what we promised, and they'll go over and above. But if you get somebody that isn't, then it does impact the rest of the team. They can see that they're working hard while somebody else isn't, and the person that isn't still expects their share of the income. The good thing with what we do is it's very obvious. The ones that work hard, they get the visitors to the website, they get the repeat customers, they earn the revenue. The ones that don't, tend to not.
Yes. And you've used a number of words in this conversation. You've referred to yourself as naive. You've talked about gut reactions. How do you characterize the impact of those feelings that you have on your business? Because I get the strong impression that when you talk about naivety, in fact, it's open to learning. Yeah. And I just wonder how you see yourself in terms of those feelings and how that impacts on the business.
I think this is the problem with language, because traditionally you think those feelings are used for apologetically. I don't at all. I think it's been my superpower that I haven't had the shackles of or constraints of necessary business knowledge. I'm 13 years in the journey now. We've got a successful business, so I don't in any way, shape or form think I'm not a good business person. I just think for me, it's about empowering myself and others to have a go anyway. You don't need to have the qualification. Even now, if I'm employing somebody, the qualifications are very low down the list, if at all. It's about the personality, the willingness to learn, the enthusiasm, the passion. And again, I don't know how much of this is influenced by the fact I've got 2 teenage girls now and I see them going off on their path of life. And yes, of course, I want them to do as well for themselves as they can do. But ultimately, qualifications will only get you so far.
That emotional intelligence is actually really, really important in business, isn't it? To read customers, to read suppliers, to understand your team. I fully agree with you that probably matters more than pure skills. You've got to be able to do the job. Yeah. But you have to be able to relate to people, don't you?
Absolutely. And what don't get me wrong, we're not brain scientists here. We're not doing operations. It can all be learned, and it can be learned on the job. It's exactly what I did, as long as you've got that willingness. So again, I think with my attitude to flexible working, I think more and more businesses see that these days. And particularly with the way that the digital world has grown, even in the, just over the decade since I've been working, you almost don't need that information, that knowledge at the forefront of your brain, because we can all find it. We've all got the opportunity to do the research, to verify our sources. What you need to be able to do is use your instincts. Does it feel right? If that's not right, who do I go to? Build a network around you, be able to go to the right people, build relationships. I mean, even more so post-COVID. I think when I first started, it was very much from behind a computer screen. And don't get me wrong, I'm from a small town, so I inevitably did know people and people knew me. But in the post-COVID world, the value of actual face-to-face and people knowing you, and with the rise of AI, I think it's going to only become more and more important for those of us who are human beings, not robots, to remind other human beings of why that connection is so important.
Yeah. Just because Teams and the like are easy doesn't make them better than that sort of personal connection.
No, and in my ideal world, it's a mixture of the two, because quite often, for example, we try and get together online once a month with the whole team. It's certainly open to the whole team, and we wouldn't be able to do that without Teams and Zoom and all of the rest. But getting them together once a year for the annual conference is more valuable than anything else. You know, having a catch up, having a chat. And whilst at our conference we do try to bring in external expertise, over recent years more than anything I've seen that it's the opportunity for them to internally network is the most important thing.
You multiply up the number of possibilities, don't you, when you've got everybody in a room to each have conversations and so on. Can I just take you back in time? COVID, you mentioned it briefly. Tell us a little bit about Mumbler going into COVID and then Mumbler coming out of COVID.
Yeah. So in the run up to COVID, we were franchising. We'd grown. I think that was the point when we had about 23 franchises, doing really well. The customers across the board tended to be visitor attractions, classes and play groups, basically everything that shut down in COVID. So we got the situation. It was frightening for us all because all the people that work for Mumbler are parents. So that sort of knowing it's coming on the horizon, not knowing what it's going to look like, all this talk of homeschooling, it was terrifying for us all. But also the knowledge that the vast majority of our revenue streams were about to disappear overnight, and they did. I've actually never sat down with a pen to paper because I didn't want to know the number, but I would estimate close to 50% of my revenue went overnight, which was terrifying. So as a business, we had to pivot. We had to think on our feet and think, how can we keep this going? Because there was many a business that closed, obviously, particularly class service providers, hospitality suffered. And so we very quickly thought, right, what can we do here? What do parents need now? And it's primarily what can be delivered at home. So we went after customers that were doing home delivery services, local restaurants, anything that was providing a service in their home. And we just, it wasn't easy. And I can look back now and think, we did ourselves proud, and we didn't lose a franchise because of COVID, I wouldn't say, or not directly. And we all just did what we needed to do to manage. Everyone's revenue went down significantly, but equally, household expenditure went down. People weren't out and about. There was no holidays. You look back now and you think, I cannot imagine how we got through it. No. So we managed somehow to sort of scrape by. And then when I look back, I'm grateful. We can look back now probably with a bit of rose-tinted glasses and think, it wasn't so bad. Well, it was so bad. But we managed to keep a business. And then even when things started to open up, we went back to a lot of our previous business and said, do you want to advertise with us, visitor attractions? And they didn't, because in the early stages, they weren't allowed maximum capacity. So they couldn't cope with the customers they had. So then, that was, I remember quite distinctively at one point, I was walking my dog up in a woods, and I think it was the November of the second year of lockdowns when they were just announced that they were cancelling Christmas again. And gosh, I actually filmed myself as a message to all my franchisees, and I was actually just crying. I was like, here we go again. Not sure quite how we're going to get through this, but we will. And trying to be that ship that sort of steadies them a little bit and saying, we will get through this, come what may.
But you've got, the emotion counts as well, because it shows you're real and care, doesn't it? And
that's it.
It was an awful time. 21, wasn't it? The second.
Yeah, and that was, it felt like we'd taken a kick in, and then another one came along. And entirely selfishly, from a business point of view, I was a limited company, and at that point, I wasn't even drawing a basic salary. I was surviving on dividends, so there was no support.
No,
I'd made a mistake in that. I should have paid myself a decent salary, but you do what you think's best at the time based on the information that you had. So, fortunately, a lot of my franchisees were sole traders, and they did get a bit of support. But as a limited company, I was one of the ones that unfortunately fell through the cracks. So I did take a bounce back loan. That took a bit of pressure off, but I'm still paying that back now. That's ultimately a 10-year loan. It's a relatively cheap loan, but still, that's going to be a noose around my neck for the next 4 or 5 years. And it was tough. Whichever way you look at it, it was tough. But we got through it. But I also had a lot of time for reflection during COVID because business was quiet. I was very lucky that all of the franchisees were able, because we were set up remote prior to that, when we were used to flexible working, other than the fact we all had to homeschool our children and try to
it's another story.
lose our minds over that. the business, the actual day-to-day running of the Mumblers wasn't much different. There was a lot of service that we could provide to our followers in terms of giving them the information that they needed, home deliveries, even things that, when I look back now, we created colouring sheets to do at home. We created ideas for days out in your back garden, things to do to keep local walks interesting, everything we could possibly think about to keep children and families sane at home. We did what we could. And then as and when there was the opportunity to get out a little bit more, we were pairing up with local authorities to do trails around town and all the outdoor sorts of things. So we did what we could, and we kept it ticking over. But personally, I reflected a lot about the franchise model and, what the future looked like for Mumbler. Because up until that point, the expansion had been purely through franchisees. But as I said, over the years, we'd lost some franchisees for, I'd say, a variety of reasons, some of them personal. But fundamentally, the ones that hadn't thrived was a lack of sales. They could do the community side of it. They could do the providing the information for local families. But our business exists on advertising sales.
Yes, because you want it
marketing.
Free to the consumer. So
exactly,
that's the only place you can get revenue.
Exactly.
Yes.
So if you can't sell advertising, then you haven't got a business. So that sort of got me thinking. And at the time, I was listening to a lot of podcasts because we're out for our daily walks and things. And for me, it was Diary of a CEO back in the day. I was listening to Steve Bartlett when he first started. And I think I've changed my views now, but in the very early days, I found him incredibly inspirational to think about how to do things differently, how to think on your feet, and if something's not working, try something else. And at that point, and I think because by that point I was 9 years into being a business owner, I was a lot more comfortable with my own skill set and with the company as a whole. So the idea of employing people wasn't as terrifying as it had been previously. In fact, it felt like the right thing to do for me. So coming out of lockdown, I thought, it's time for a change here with Mumbler. And whilst I still have franchises for sale, and if the perfect person falls in my lap, I would definitely continue to sell a franchise. It opened up the opportunity to where I've had a franchise previously and they've either handed it back or walked away or whatever. I've got this sort of start of a business. Why not put in my own staff to run it? Have somebody on the ground and then a larger sales team at HQ to do the selling. And we've done that. I've now got 5 HQ franchises that we're running with a member of staff on the ground, running the sales from us, and that's going pretty well.
When you say on the ground, you mean in the area in which it's operating?
Yeah, the Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole is one. We've got Stockport, we've got Halifax, Harrogate is still run as one, and Gateshead most recently, we've just taken that one over. So so I have a part-time worker on the ground, part-time employed by me. They run the social media side of things. They're the content creation. They're the eyes and ears on the ground. And then a sales team at HQ that follow up the leads and do the sales. So
explain to me what you feel are the pros and cons of a franchisee versus having your own employed staff to do the same.
It's very different, I would say. And if you have a good franchisee model is brilliant. And the ones that I've got and that have lasted the course are good. I think the problem is where something's missing or the personality doesn't quite fit or they don't quite have the skill set. With a franchise model, unless it's in your franchise contract, you're on very sticky ground. You can ask and you can cajole and you can encourage people to do things. But ultimately, they've bought into a business with a clear set of guidance and rules. And if they don't want you to do what you're asking them to do, then that's their right. And you can't blame them, which I think really does reiterate the need for a very good, strong franchise agreement and regular reviews. So that was definitely part of it. But really for me, it was that sort of knowledge that the right person has to have the sales skill set. So that was a learning with the franchise sales, which is why I say if the right person still came along, I'm still open to that. It's still part of the business, but it's no longer the entire business. I've got the two halves. And with regard to employees, again, it's down to the right people. With the team around you, they are pulling in the same direction as you. They're happy to take the guidance, or whether or not they're happy or not, they will.
Yes, that's an important point, isn't it?
Yeah.
You can impose in the nicest possible way and the ways and means of doing it, but you can.
But also with a franchisee, it's their business. I mean, they're running it to your criteria and within your branding, but they're only a hop, skip and a jump away from being self-employed, entrepreneurs.
Yes.
They've got a lot of the same skill sets, and that's, that honestly can be a real plus or a negative as well. It's, you want them to be dynamic, you want them to have spark and a bit of grit about them, but equally, then you get strong, independent people, which can, from a management point of view, can prove tricky. And it's a good problem to have, don't get me wrong, but that is part of my role. If there is any internal conflict or particularly with franchises that are quite close to each other, there's boundary issues. And over the years, we've probably, had a lot of them. And ultimately, that's up to, that lands at my feet, and I've got to be willing and able to help resolve any conflict. So that leads me to the question, how do you resolve conflict in business? What's your way? I would say it depends on what the conflict is. I think in the very early days when it was boundary disputes and having a clear set of instructions, whilst my husband isn't involved in the day-to-day of the business, he is very much a valuable asset in the business for things like that, because I went to him with a set of problems, this is happening, and he was very good at, right, we need a clear set of directions here, imagining every scenario. And it's things like if a customer is based outside of your area, but you know them personally. That sort of, scenarioing out all the different iterations of that, or a customer that's in somebody else's area, but they want to advertise with you and they make the approach to you. What do you do? So my husband was invaluable in things like that. He would actually get it down on pen on paper, set up a set of rules, took it to all the franchisees. And in fact, in their franchise agreement, they have to adhere to the cross-territory selling rules. So that's how we dealt with that. It's very binary, black and white. There's other times when it's a minor disagreement. And ultimately, a lot of the time, people just want somebody to listen. So I have to be available, and I'm happy to be available for people to pick up the phone or WhatsApp me or however they want to contact me and, unburden themselves. One of the things, I think I'm a very solution-orientated person. So one of the things I have to be careful for is not just jump in with a solution. It's not always what people want. No. So I think I'm always learning on things like that. And sometimes I have to make the decision. Fortunately, my team, just like I respect them, they respect me. And on occasions, even if it's not entirely what they would want, they will accept a compromise for the sake of company harmony. And I have to be the one who arbitrates that. Unfortunately, I've never had a situation yet where somebody's fallen out with me or left the company over it. So far, so good. So perhaps you are listening more than you perhaps think sometimes. Perhaps. That's fascinating. Well, Sally, you've come out of COVID, you're now employing more staff. What's next in your plans? I think for the time being, more of the same. Whenever I've grown as a business, there's always a pain point. It gets to the stage where, and I imagine anybody who runs a small business will appreciate this, you have to wear so many different hats. And it's that situation where you've got more work than you can handle. There's more jobs internally, all the things that I consider to be boring jobs that a lot of people probably wouldn't, like financial stuff and doing the invoicing. But it's all part of running a business. And then inevitably it gets to a point where I'm doing it all myself. And then finally I feel we're at a position where I can afford to take somebody on to take a few hats off me. I like to think I'm a fairly hands-off manager. I like to give people the autonomy to do the job themselves, but with the knowledge that they can come to me and ask me questions if they want to. So I've just taken on, last month I took on a new member of staff. And in fact, in September, I took on a previous member of staff. So we've had new people into the business recently. So there's 3 franchises that I'm particularly focusing on at the moment to try and get their revenue up to the point where, yes, I know they're self-sufficient and profitable. And it is quite a long process. I've never yet, other than grant funding, taken any external investment. But I think also as a business person, I say I'm getting to a situation where I'm definitely more open to that now. And I think ultimately if we wanted to go fully national, I would have to do that. Yeah. And it's interesting because when I look back, Mumbler was my third baby, whichever way you look at it. But as with children, they grow and, your job as a parent is to set them off into the world. And more I see with Mumbler, my ambition for it. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's got to make money, we've got to earn a living, but financially was never the point. The point was to create something that was useful initially to myself, but also to other parents. And from that point of view, I would love that every parent in the UK has access to a Mumbler. And ultimately, the only way to do that will be to get expertise and get investment, and then potentially in the years to come, go for it on a large scale. Can I ask you then, can you see a time when your third child leaves home? Potentially.
Yeah.
Which I find it crazy that I'm even saying that now, because I remember in the early days, the thought of even having somebody to work in the office and post on my behalf on Facebook was terrifying. Whereas now, as I said previously, I'm not afraid to think there's people out there with more experience than me, and I know there will potentially be people out there. Over the past few years, when I talk about Mumbler at various networking events or through friends or around a dinner party table, you see people's ears prick up, and people who aren't necessarily in the parenting business or digital business thinking, there's a lot more that you can do with this. And I'm like, I do know that. And when the time is right, I have every faith that it'll happen. And I don't quite know what that'll look like yet.
But I suppose I get the impression from you that doing what you enjoy matters and you do that well.
Yeah.
And other things that can be done, that's for the future for others. Is that fair?
Yes, but also I'm willing to learn. Yeah. I don't think I will be the only person at the helm because, as I say, when we're talking about accelerated growth and financial investment, I don't have that skill set yet. So I will definitely want more. And also, we're at the stage now where it's me and 19 other people. And at the moment, we're just about managing in terms of management structure. But I'll need people who've got more experience than me if we are going to ever accelerate growth to the extent that I think we potentially could.
Sally, can you give me an example of a story, an anecdote of why you get out of bed and do this every day?
Yeah, absolutely. Why I started Mumbler and why I continue to do Mumbler is it's not the financial side of things. I mean, don't get me wrong, I need to earn a living out of it, but it's the stories that I hear from our users, and a lot of them that I'm not even aware of at the time, but inevitably they sort of percolate back. And we run a Harrogate Mumbler Awards every year, and 2 years ago we had a charity along at the night, because we like to do a charity raffle, and it was a domestic abuse charity in Harrogate that was relatively newly set up. They weren't even a registered charity at that point, but they are now. And the lady who gave a speech at the night to try and encourage people to buy raffle tickets told a story which I wasn't even aware of. But it turned out that 2 years previous, she'd turned up in Harrogate without anything other than the clothes that her and her children were wearing, and she'd escaped from a domestic abuse situation. And unbeknownst to me at the time, it was through Mumbler that she set up a new life. She managed to get in touch with people who were able to give her the clothing and the equipment that her and her family needed. They were able to make networks of friends, find out what was going on locally, and just everything that somebody would need. And I wasn't even aware of that. And it blew me away, and it still does. And there's stories like that come out all the time. And you think, do you know what? We've created something really good here. And that's the stories I'm most proud of. And that's why I continue to do what I do.
I mean, that's fabulous. It just resonates, doesn't it? You can feel it's not a business. It's much more than that, isn't it? It really absolutely is. So, Sally, tell me, what's the most surprising turn that your career has taken to date?
Well, I would say the fact that I'm, in essence, in a digital marketing job, and I am not a digital marketer. I was a chartered surveyor. I had children, everything changed.
That's an incredible difference. I don't want to cast aspersions on chartered surveyors versus the creative brilliance of digital marketers, but that's quite a transition, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And my degree, 8 years of training, and then 5 years in practice, but no regrets. It was the right decision for me.
The creative animal came out.
Apparently.
Sally, what is one thing in the business world that you would like to ban?
I'd probably say negativity. And don't get me wrong, people can have differences of opinion, and quite often, particularly if you're brainstorming an idea, there'll be things that are ridiculous, that might not be right. But I think the opportunity to just be free with your ideas, be positive, be encouraging, and not just be a naysayer for naysaying's sake.
You want creative challenge, don't you?
Exactly.
You want a solution, even if they don't agree. How about? Yeah. Thank you. Sally, you have an interesting background, and you tell me that you don't have formal training in being a business person. What do you say to those out there who think, I need to have this perfect business plan, be a perfect person to come into this mysterious world of business?
I think it's a fallacy. Perfection is certainly not the goal, and particularly as a young person or somebody trying to get their qualifications, there's so much pressure. What are you going to do when you're older? Like, I honestly think these days a job for life is unlikely to happen. So I think it's so much more important to follow your passions, because I fundamentally believe that if you like something, you'll get good at it. And if you get good at it, someone will pay you to do it. So I would say 80% is good enough, without a doubt. The strive for perfection is a waste of time.
I've got to ask you a follow-up question. Are you a perfectionist?
No, absolutely not. I would say if you asked any of my team, they'd probably say I'm a bit slapdash. But I'm okay with that, ultimately with what we do. I think, again, it depends on your industry. If you're a book publisher, you need to be perfect when you're producing those pages. For us, we're an online digital platform. So if there is a spelling mistake or if we get something wrong, we can correct it. And there's been learnings over the years, don't get me wrong. There's been times when we've got things wrong and it's cost us. We've had instances where I can think of one off the top of my head where we reproduced a photo that we didn't have permission to use, and we got pulled up for that, and it ended up costing us money. But there's always a learning, and ultimately the blame for that lands at my feet because I didn't train them well enough. But you live and you learn, and as a team you move forward.
You've talked about Mumbler as a family business. What would you say if your daughters said, "Mum, can I join you"?
I'd be, on the one hand, delighted. It is a family business. My sister's still in the business now, and one of my cousins actually works in the business. But equally, I'd like them to carve their own paths. I think at this stage, they're only the teenagers. They don't have to make any life decisions. And to be fair, they've actually worked in the business since they were born, because whenever I need to be out and about with the children, they've obviously been along for the ride. And even more so, just with the Mumbler Awards that we've done last month, my 16-year-old was on stage helping me present the awards. So they get roped in whether they like it or not. But yeah, I'd be incredibly proud whatever they want to do.
Sally, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed the episode, please like, share and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.